he's like, his skin is perfect without blemish, right? This kind of stuff. Just recognize, holding 7 stars is harder for me to get my mind around. Does that mean literally like stars in his hand? Or is it a symbol of, this is the way they,
this way even.
Yeah, often, yes,
Yeah,
exactly, right? Lampstands are symbolic of illumination, which means spiritual illumination. So there's 7 lampstands around, right? Anyone who grew up going to synagogue would recognize a lampstand with 7 parts, right? Sound a lot like a what?
The menorah.
Menorah, right, exactly, right? So you're instantly put in mind of the Maccabees, and you're put in mind of this time that God providentially provided for the people. And so all this stuff is
Did they
created
build
in this
lampstands
imagery.
in numbers, didn't they? Or didn't they make lampstands in numbers?
Oh, yes.
It's the same, right? The
They
7,
absolutely
yeah.
did.
Just read it.
Yeah, so the lampstand, so this is going to put them in mind of, and this should have been, really be putting you in mind of temple worship, because that's what we're going to see.
They made the temple.
As we launch into, and when we get to chapter 4, it's going to be temple worship. Now, we're not at all familiar with that as Gentiles. And even modern Jews aren't familiar with it because they haven't been to temple. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD. But this would be, or hearkening back to this thing that was destroyed fairly recently by the timeline of when this was written. Right? So just something for us to think about as we get full on into the imagery here is that don't think of it like a movie. Think of it like a list of descriptions that are meant to draw you in by analogy. Okay.
That's why reading mythology is so important to
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah, it is. It is. And poetry helps too, because poets use images and they mean them to mean 2 things at once. And it helps us with this kind of language. The first time I decorated a youth room. We got free reign to paint it. And we all doing posters. Everyone had a wall. It was a cross-shaped room. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, you had all these walls you could paint. So everybody got a wall. And I did this image. And I was fairly young and naive. And so I have a sword coming out of Jesus' mouth. That's really not what this means.
Looks cool,
looks cool, but it was not a sword coming out of Jesus. It was a good icon, but it was not a good picture. His mouth being a 2-edged sword, his words are going to cut and pierce. This is the book of Hebrews, right? The word of the Lord is like a sharp 2-edged sword separating bone from sinew. It cuts because it cuts through all the garbage. It makes us see the truth. It's like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting away the dead flesh and bringing healing. And his face shining like the sun in full strength. You're going to have this. Again, we know that by the 90s, we know from Roman senators that Christians are worshiping around on the hillsides around Rome at sunrise. Not because they're worshiping the sun like it's Apollo, but because the rising of the sun reminds them of the rising of Jesus Christ. It could be that they had this imagery in mind too, his face shining like the sun, right? Depends on how widely dispersed and distributed this letter was at that time. But we have that from the pagan senators watching weird Christian behavior from their perspective. They get on the hillsides and they're facing the sun, and they pray to this dead carpenter like he's God. We don't get it. You know? Yeah. So for next time, I'm going to invite you to, if you wish, I'll finish out the chapter here, but invite you to look ahead at the letters to the churches, because that's what we're going to jump into for next time. So 2 weeks from now, because next week is the potluck. After that, we'll be running full out. I don't go out of town anymore until Advent. But we're going to spend a lot of time on the churches. I want you to see this is the most applicable part of the book. So if you want to look ahead at the letters to the churches, I'm just going to finish up chapter 1 here, and then we can go. Verse 17, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying, Fear not, I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. Remember what I said about Hades and hell and all that stuff? He has the keys to this realm of the dead. He's in control now. Write therefore the things that you have seen, those that are and those that are to take place after this. As for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and the 7 golden lampstands, The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So now we're told what those symbols mean. Okay, and sometimes we'll get that, and sometimes we're meant to infer from our familiarity with other scriptural resources. But here we have it directly explained for us.
Interesting that he holds the keys to death and Hades and gave away the keys to the kingdom of God to Peter
Yes.
and his disciples.
That is interesting. I never thought of that comparison and contrast. Yes. Yes. Excellent. Well, and we do have the keys to the kingdom because we have the opportunity to preach or not.
Right.
Yes. The opportunity to share or not.
Good stuff.
All right.
So we're reading, what are we reading?
Basically verses 2 and 3, or chapters 2 and 3, excuse me.
Yeah.
It has the different.
Yeah, you'll see, most churches are going to have headings. So it'll say to the church in Ephesus, the church in Smyrna, the church in Pergamum, that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
And the red, is that God or Jesus?
Yeah, so if you have a red letter edition, red is for Jesus is speaking. Okay? Wherever it shows up.
I was looking for a map
So these
in this edition that doesn't have it, but are these churches like in Western Asia?
Yeah, you know what? I'll grab a map for next time to throw it
Okay.
up on the screen so y'all can see where they are.